This episode is brought to you by The Skeptical Buddha, The Tao of Science, my book, which is a thoughtful discourse on Eastern philosophy and how it helped birth ideas required for science and skepticism and the way it fell behind in the face of new evidence. This book discusses the long history of both philosophies as well as the tenets and variations within the varying sects, along with psychology and our own natural biases. It discusses how to counter our natural biases using science and the underlying concepts of meditation and mindfulness, a more complex understanding of how science operates than most of the public understands, and why it is the best tool we have to discover truth and reality, as well as philosophical ideas we might embrace as technology progresses. The material is packaged in a way that the average person can understand, with rich illustrations to draw the reader in and feel at peace. Welcome to After School Democracy, the podcast that attempts to fill in the gaps you almost certainly missed in school about politics, economics, and history. It's been a while since I did a video on religion, and creationism especially, but I've been doing a lot of thinking about the ways to replicate some of the aspects of the hunter-gatherer society, as that is how we evolved for most of our existence. This time period was not only when we were healthier, but also less violent and aggressively altruistic to the rest of our tribe. But recently it struck me, creationists don't believe in any of that. They believe we popped out fully formed as agrarians, and this is our natural state. If taken literally, Adam was the first farmer. He had to work the ground by the sweat of his brow to survive. That was his curse for eating of the tree. Because of this, all who descended from him are now mostly evil and can only be saved through Jesus Christ, or they will literally go around murdering people or appear to fake being good people to trick people into leaving Jesus because demons? This is how we are, and humans will always be evil unless they accept Jesus, so therefore all Christians are good or struggling to be good, and all non-Christians are by their nature evil. Therefore, they always give a free pass to anyone who claims to be a Christian and automatically distrust non-Christians. It was our move from hunter-gatherer to agrarian that we began seeing humans getting more and more violent and warlike. However, for most of Western civilization's existence, hunter-gatherers were viewed as savages or people fallen from God's favor. Therefore, they view violence as a natural state of humanity when we were actually fairly peaceful until farming took off and we had more people packed into the same piece of land, and a much, much less varied diet, leading to lower health and therefore more aggressive and violent behaviors. Hunter-gatherers didn't own things except for religious purposes because they're on the move a lot. Agrarians collected things since they were sedentary, and making sure the child you gave your material wealth to came from your genitals became crucial. Humans in general are mostly good by nature when raised like we evolved to live. But we are so divorced from that, of course, we act badly, especially with the introduction of lead and mercury. This Hobbsian view of humanity goes completely against science, but because they believe Adam was the first farmer, they believe all humans are just naturally evil and violent. That's just how we are, so let's use punishment for everything to stop that inherent evil and violent nature. Thomas Hobbes viewed humanity as mostly evil, and therefore they need a strong ruler appointed by God to be strict and firm with them and meting out violence upon the wicked, creating that punishment system of justice, and would have looked at you like you were insane if you tried to explain restorative justice or systemic violence. And to be fair, at his time he was living through some of Europe's most violent times with a century-long war, malnutrition, and violence were very truly the norm. He saw humans at their worst, with deficient nutrients in the brain and generational trauma, so of course he would conclude this was humanity in its natural state. And the problem was that they no longer had a good, strong, brutal king, just like the mindsets of Chinese and Greek philosophers. In fact, much of the progress of the Enlightenment under Locke and Rousseau was countered by the dogma of Hobbesianism, fearing that if people ruled themselves through a democracy, we would all destroy ourselves, never taking into account that being ruled is what put us into this violent, unnatural state in the first place. The concept of mob mentality was an idea proposed by and for the aristocracy, where a crowd of people can turn violent as a mindless mob, when in reality most mobs of the time knew exactly what they were doing and were way more strategic, such as what happened during the storming of the Bastille. Push people to extreme desperation to where no matter what they do, they still lose, and only then will you see mindless violence for the sake of violence, as nihilism from feeling of absolute helplessness takes over. In fact, the scientific research shows the counterpoint, the wisdom of the crowd, where when given a jar of, say, marbles, the average of all guesses will be pretty spot on, even if everyone's guess is all over the place. It's why if given the right amount of information, on average, people as a collective group will usually come to the best conclusion. But that can only happen when they feel empowered and like their decision will actually have any real impact on anything around them. Propaganda and misinformation are what causes mob mentality, not our natural ignorant state, and the ruling class benefits from lies and misinformation, and people religiously believe in them. It's why capitalism can sell itself as the only natural way to run things, as greed is just how humans are, and laziness is also how humans are, so use greed to create wealth that forces people who would otherwise be lazy to work, even though, while there is some truth to this, it's missing a massive amount of information, and the early church was essentially a communist entity, and capitalism would have been its blood enemy. So many people I know denigrate direct democracy because they view us as these Hobbsian idiots, when this is not even remotely our natural state. We all have a learned helplessness about us, causing many to lash out angrily and violently at our own feeble power over our own lives, or to drop out and encourage others not to vote at all, from nihilism because the change is way too slow, often because of anachronistic imbalances in the representative system. As I discussed in my video on Six Sigma, there are natural ways we spent most of our existence discussing issues, and getting around our own egos, but we lost that power. And when disaster strikes, we are hardwired to immediately self-organize and relive the aggressive altruism, such as in the book A Paradise in Hell. In a disaster, it is the powerful, not the powerless, who end up suffering from elite panic, as it is known, as they have so much more power to lose. During 9/11, while they were all evacuating, the way the stairwells were set up, which was in no way enough, people went out of their way to let others go ahead of themselves with zero prompting or enforcement, and remember, these were New Yorkers, but that means nothing to creationists. Science and evidence literally don't matter to them, or they'd no longer be creationists, and they are the most likely to engage in the mob mentality, being the most susceptible to misinformation and propaganda. They rely on conspiracist thinking and embrace authoritarianism under the label of freedom. They want to enforce the most strict and draconian punishments in the belief of spare the rod, spoil the child, just as Hobbes called for. In science, the closer we are to our hunter-gatherer roots and social systems with our Maslow's hierarchy of needs met, the better we are and more likely to question the morality of things we used to view as normal. The further we get, the worse we get as a species. But since to a creationist, the world started at 6,000 years ago, out of nothing, and none of that satanic evolution involved, hunter-gatherers are just violent savages because they lost their connection to God. Someday, perhaps, we will get over this mindset. Until then, we're going to keep getting authoritarians in power, and the answer to any tragedy is to lock more people away, when science says that is exactly the opposite of how reality works. So as always, thank you all for watching this as a video or listening to this as a podcast, which I'm sure was completely uncontroversial to anyone, especially to the YouTube monetization team. So if you found this useful, please donate to my Patreon. Just a reminder that I'm Anubis2814 on YouTube, and I have almost 700 videos on my channel that I've made over the past 11 years on religion, science, psychology, and politics. Please go check them out, and if your site has the option, like, rate, review, and comment. A special thanks goes out to Kendall Copperberg, Mylon Mia, Ogrel, Elias Garcia Guevara, and Joe Taylor for their $10 or more Wapawet level donations. I'm always humbled by the fact that they find my work worth funding and worth driving me forward. Thank you all. Please consider donating to my work if you can, and thank you all for listening.